Hey guys, we're here with our next topic here, talking about um, gains from trade. Okay, we're going to prove why trading with other nations is going to be a benefit for both groups, even if one group nation, we're going to call them today, is not very good at producing stuff. Okay, so first I'm going to start you out with a quick question here, just as a review. So pause it, kind of go through these answers on your own. These are going to be review from the last set of notes, talking about production possibilities curves and those types of things. So pause it real quick if you haven't done so. Answer these questions. Make sure you're trying to do them. Okay, so I'm gonna complete these answers here. Um, First things first, we've got some shifts in our production possibilities curve. So for number one, all right, we've got the population increasing. And I just made two theoretical products here. If you talk about it in like an economics class, they're going to call guns manufactured goods and they're going to call butter like service goods or whatever. Well, the bottom line is we need people to produce both. Okay, so we have an increased population. That's going to increase resources for everything. Our new production possibilities curve is going to completely shift to the right. Okay, we got more people, we can produce more stuff in both products. Number two, things change a little bit. Now we only have an increase in technology in producing guns. If that's the case, remember we can't produce more butter. We're stuck right there. But if we can produce more guns, our new graph is going to look something like that. Okay. Um, if that's not clear to you, make sure that you are doing the assignments. Kind of rewatch the notes, and look for your resources on my AP. Okay. If we have a decrease in technology in producing butter, all right, that's simply going to be meaning that we can't. It's not changing what we can do for guns, but we have a decrease in technology. I don't know. Maybe we lose the ability to refrigerate butter for a long time. I don't know. Whatever the case might be, right? We're going to shift our butter line into the left. Okay, we can produce less there. Over here, I've got, I kind of gave you some maximum outputs, okay, similar to what we did the other day. And we're asking you for what is the opportunity cost, okay? How much am I giving up to produce 1 unit of butter? So I've got to get B here by itself, okay? So I've got to get 1B. The way that we're going to do that is we're going to divide by 14, and now we have 1B. Okay, so 1 unit of butter equals, that's going to be 10 sevenths or 10 sevenths. That's our answer right there, 10 sevenths. Okay, we can't reduce that anymore. All righty, so you could write 10 sevenths right there. You could also put a decimal in there too, but 10 sevenths is going to be the easiest way to write that. I would always put a box around it so I know what you're trying to uh, tell me. Okay. We're going to move forward here. We've got kind of a lot to do. Now, you are starting off, okay, on your notes here where you left off the other day. Okay, so you are, if you have your notes pulled up, we're going to start with these vocabulary terms. Okay, we're going to fill these out, and it's going to be extremely important that you can keep these straight as we go forward. Now, once we get past this gains of from trade, you're going to kind of be responsible for taking your own notes. You're going to have to write some stuff kind of on your own. You're going to be modeling kind of some things that I do. So anyway, have a sheet of paper ready. If you have this printed out, you have space, wherever that is, okay, taking it on notebook paper is going to be the easiest thing for you. But we are starting on the notes that are going to finish these notes you got off the other day. Okay, so we're starting on the vocab. Some pretty simple terms, okay, that we've got to keep straight. All right. So first term is absolute advantage. All right. So when we're going to compare two countries here, we're going to do that in a second. All right. The absolute advantage has to do with the country, all right, or individual or region, however we want to describe it. Okay. And we're going to do it both ways as we go through. All right. Is we're going to produce more of a product, all right, using the same amount of resources. What that means for us is we are using all resources we have at our disposal. Okay. So the book definition says this, okay, but we need to know that the same amount of resources means all resources are using efficiently. Which remember, that means if we have a production possibilities curve, we are somewhere on the line. We're always going to assume that we're going to produce at a maximum amount. Okay, we need to do that to keep things to keep things simple. We need to do that to be able to eliminate assumptions. Okay. Comparative advantage. Okay. Well, let me go back to an absolute advantage for a second. If the United States can produce 100 cars in a day and China can produce 20 cars in a day, the United States has the absolute advantage. Okay. Comparative advantage is a little bit different. Comparative advantage has to take into the opportunity cost, okay, compared to other producers. All right. And whichever company, or I'm sorry, whichever country has a lower opportunity cost, okay, is the one that has the comparative advantage. All right, so you want to keep that straight. Know the difference between these two things. There's usually a question on the test that has to do with identifying this particular concept. Okay, and the last thing is we'll throw the term around specialization. What we'll get to is we're going to say that between two countries, the country that has the comparative advantage in producing one product or the other is going to specialize in producing that product, and then from there we're going to figure out a way to trade. Okay, and we're going to prove that before we get you off here today. All right, like I said, kind of the best way to get the hang of this stuff is just to go through some examples, and we're going to get right into it. All right, so what you need to probably do is you probably need to copy down this table here. Okay, so you know what we are talking about. So notice first of all, we've got two. I used states in this case. Okay, we've got two states in this case. We've got Indiana, all right, and we've got Hawaii. Now I'm going to box these off in different colors so it's a little bit easier to keep them straight. And what you're going to find is sometimes when we do these problems, just knowing what you're looking at. Those of you that have taken some math tests before, which you've all taken math tests, but the more complicated math tests, some of you guys that have done that, you guys know that just keeping things straight is a lot of time the main battle. Okay, and knowing what I'm showing and knowing what I'm seeing is going to be the main challenge of any particular problem. Okay, so first things first, let's identify the absolute advantages for each of these products. Okay, if I'm Indiana, I can produce 2 bushels of pineapples. If I'm Hawaii, I can produce 20 bushels of pineapples. Remember, using all of our resources. Who can produce more? Absolute advantage. More product than the other. That's pretty straightforward. Our pineapple absolute advantage is going to be Hawaii. Okay. Now, let's also look at the absolute advantage for corn. Indiana can produce 20, Hawaii can produce 5. Our absolute advantage for corn is Indiana. Okay, straightforward. Those are easy. We should never miss that problem. That's super, super simple. Now, comparative advantage is a little bit different. Here's how I like to set up my comparative advantage, problem. Okay, how I'm going to solve this. Again, keeping things straight. Okay, so I'm just going to put, I have a little T chart here started. I'm going to put Hawaii on this side. I'm just going to label it with an H. And then I'm going to take Hawaii's factors here, right? I'm going to say, okay, Hawaii has 20 bushels of pineapples if they use all their resources. And that's equal to 5 bushels of corn. We did this on the previous lecture. All right. At the same time, I'm going to stay over here and I'm going to do the same thing for Indiana. Okay. And they can do 2 pineapples and 20 corn. Now, notice what I've kind of done here, keeping things straight. I try to keep the P's in this case on the left, and I tried to keep the C's in this case on the right, just so I know what I'm looking at. I have Hawaii labeled, I have Indiana labeled. Now we're off and running. All we've got to do is solve for each variable here. So you can solve for either one first. Gosh darn it. You can solve for either one first. I'm going to solve for C first, just because it's the smaller one. Okay, so I'm going to divide by 5. I've got 1C equals 4 pineapples. Okay, and I'm going to box it. Okay, anytime I get one of these variables by itself, I'm going to box it. Okay, and I'm just going to kind of keep moving here too, and I'm going to divide by 4 with this. Okay, I'm going to solve for P now. Okay, I'm going to kind of take a little bit of a shortcut. I'm going to solve for P, and now I know that 1 pineapple equals 1/4 corn. And I'm going to box it. Okay, so now I have those things somewhat organized, so I'm able to move and come back to that. I can move forward and come back to that when I need to. All right. Now, same thing. We're going to compare Hawaii and Indiana. Let's move through this. I'm going to solve for C first. All right. So 1C equals 1/10 of a pineapple. Okay. Box it. And then I'm going to go down here and say 1 pineapple equals 10 corn. Okay, so remember what these are showing us. Okay, this means here that if I produce 1 unit of corn, all right, I am giving up 4 pineapples for Hawaii. If I produce 1 unit of corn in Indiana, I'm giving up 1/10 of a pineapple. To figure out the comparative advantage between these two is you're looking at this number and you're looking at this number. Okay, whichever one is smaller, okay, is the comparative advantage. All right, so Indiana gives up less pineapples to produce corn than Hawaii. Indiana has the comparative advantage in producing corn. Okay, so I'm going to write Indiana in there. In this case, it's kind of obvious, right? We don't grow pineapples in Indiana. It makes it pretty easy for us to understand that. It's not always as obvious as that with some of these problems, but we started out with an easy one. Now, on the pineapples one, we're going to check our work. The comparative advantage between the two is always going to flip. Okay, there's always you can't have the comparative advantage in both. You can't do it. Okay, sometimes you can kind of have a tie, but we usually don't see that. Okay, so let's double check our work here. Hawaii gives up 1/4 of a unit of corn to produce a pineapple. If Indiana wants to work hard to produce a pineapple, they've got to give up 10 units of corn. 1/4 is less than 1/10. Okay, 1/4 less than 1/10. We're going to give the comparative advantage in pineapples to white. Okay, that's what we need to be able to draw. All righty, let's move forward here. Let's practice another one. Same thing. Pause it here real quick. Kind of jump through the work on your own, and then we're going to work on it together as we move forward. But it is very effective if you were to work on it on your own. Okay, so I'll show you. If you didn't want to start yet, I'll set it up for you first. We've got a Mexico side, and we've got a Brazil side. All right, but kind of jump through and make sure that you take some time to do that to get good at it. All right, hopefully you did that. Let's kind of start things off first. Like I said, I like to box things off. I like to keep things straight. There's my Mexico box. You don't have to use different colors. I'm just trying to get kind of fancy here. Okay, so this is what I'm looking at. Let's first identify who has the absolute advantage in producing cattle. Mexico can produce 30 cattle with their resources. Brazil's 15. Our absolute advantage in cattle is Mexico. All right, let's look at goats. Mexico can produce 60. Brazil can produce 45. Mexico has the absolute advantage in producing goats. Different than last time, right? Last time we had Indiana and Hawaii flip their absolute advantages. Okay, so anyway, this time Mexico is way better at stuff than Brazil. Okay, hypothetically. All righty. Now you've got to hopefully starting with your, figuring out the comparative advantage. Mexico is 30C equals 60 goats. Brazil, 15C, 45 goats. Okay, again, my C's stay on the left in this case, my G's are on the right. I try to keep things straight as we go through it. Okay, so let's solve for Brazil first since I got my blue pen on. I'm going to solve for C first. Okay, it doesn't matter, but I'm going to solve for C first on the other side too. So we've got in this case 1C equals 45 divided by 15 is 3G. Box it. Okay, let's flip that over. 1G equals a third of a cattle. Okay, so I've just figured out my opportunity cost for each, a goat and a cattle, okay, in Brazil. Let's flip it over to the Mexico side here. Do the same thing. Again, keep your C solved with the C. So 1C equals, in this case, 60 divided by 30, 2 goats. Okay, box, flip it, 1 goat equals half of a cattle. Box it. All right, now we're set. Now we can compare. Remember, what we are looking for is we are looking for when we have 1C and 1C, who gives up less? Okay, who gives up less to produce that one cattle? All right, well, in this case, 2 is less than 3. Mexico has the comparative advantage in producing cattle. Okay, so because 2 is less than 3. All right, makes sense. They had the absolute advantage in producing cattle and goats. They got to have the comparative advantage in producing at least one of them. Okay, you might think that it's both. All right, so now we got to compare 1/2 versus 1/3 because we're on the goat side. Well, 1/2 is more than 1/3, right? 1/3 is 33%. One half is 50%. Sometimes fractions get a little bit tricky if you're going too fast. Okay, make sure you're doing what you need to do. So 1/3 is less than 1/2. We know that Brazil now has the comparative advantage in producing goats. Okay. Yes, we have Mexico as the absolute advantage in both. We will never, ever, ever have the same country have a comparative advantage in both. Ever, ever, ever. Like I said, sometimes you can have a tie. I've seen that on the test once or twice, but you will never have both down here. That should be a red flag. Okay. There's those two examples. Okay. We've got one more for you here. Okay. Take a second. Make sure that you are looking at this and coming up with the answer. I'm going to pause. I'm going to show you the answer. We're going to go through things a little bit quicker so we're not taking so much of your time. Okay, we're back with you here. All right, I went through and I filled this out just to kind of speed things up. You can check your work with it. Okay, so this is what I came up with. All right, and again, if you need to pause and check it, I'm going to kind of going a little bit faster here. Blackbeard, obvious, comparative or absolute advantage in both. Do the math. You should come up with your coconuts comparative advantage is Calico Jack, oysters, Blackbeard. Now, if you got something wrong, figure out what you did. The next main question is, okay, I asked you to draw these people's production possibility curves on a graph. You don't have graph paper at home. Maybe you do. Not a big deal. I'll show you that in a second. Then we're going to say, okay, is it possible for these two to trade with each other if they, I'm sorry, to benefit if they trade? Okay, so let's first of all kind of review here. Okay, and remember that if if these countries don't trade, okay, and on this case here is this is Blackbeard's production possibilities curve, right? He can produce 25 or 25. Now remember, if he doesn't trade, he can only consume on that line. He cannot consume outside of it. Okay. Same thing with Calico Jack here. He's stuck right here, 16 coconuts or 8 oysters. Okay. He can only consume on that line. Now, looking at our situation here, you might say, well, Blackbeard's just way, way, way better at producing stuff. Why on earth would he even waste his time with Calico Jack? He's got the absolute advantage. Calico Jack's going to waste his time. Now, we're going to prove here why that might be something that trading is going to make them both better off. Okay. So anyway, I had this table. I'm going to pause again and I'm going to fill this table out and I'll kind of explain it after it gets filled out. Okay, as we kind of move forward. And then I'll explain it and hopefully that speeds things up a little bit and you're not spending a whole bunch of time watching me write stuff down. Okay, so I went ahead and filled out this chart here. Okay, I'm going to explain it as we go along. Okay, so first of all, All right, I just picked a random spot, okay, for outputs before specialization. And an output is simply like, okay, what do I produce? All right. So we're going to assume, and we're just going to pick a spot. Blackbeard is going to produce 11 coconuts, 14 oysters. All right. So Blackbeard was 11 coconuts, 14 oysters. That would be on that spot right there. Theoretically, he can produce and consume anywhere on this line, right? But we just picked a spot. Remember, you can't consume outside of it. All right. And then for Calico Jack, we said 7 and 2. So 7 oysters and 2 coconuts. Again, he can produce anywhere on this line and consume anywhere on this line if he's the only producer. Okay. So those are their original spots. Now, we've got to assume some things. Okay. And again, obviously, the first thing would be like, well, what if they don't want to eat oysters that day? Or what if they don't want to eat coconuts that day? Well, don't get so complicated, okay? Just assume that what we want, our unlimited wants, is we want to consume outside of this line, okay? If we can get outside of this line, that's going to be better, okay? Now, if we specialize, so we're going to produce what we have the comparative advantage in, right? So we have Calico Jack is going to produce coconuts, Blackbeard's going to produce oysters. Okay, so if we specialize, okay, to use that fancy term, all right, Blackbeard's going to produce all oysters. Calico Jack's going to produce all coconuts. All right. Eventually, all right, we're going to figure out a line of trade, okay, that is going to be beneficial for both of us. I went through and did that. Now, this line of trade, okay, if I am Blackbeard and I'm going to produce oysters, okay, my trade, okay, I've got to get more than one oyster. I've got to get more than one coconut per oyster. Okay, I've got to get more than one because otherwise I'm wasting my time. Okay, so I've got to get more than one coconut per oyster that I am deciding to specialize in. Okay, let's see if that's the case. Am I getting more than one oyster for? I'm sorry, more than one coconut for every oyster. 13 is bigger than 9. We're getting that. I'm giving 9 oysters in this case. Is the hypothetical term of trade. Okay, I'm giving 9 and I'm getting 13. Now, same thing. If I am Calico Jack and I'm producing coconuts, okay, I've got to get more than one half of an oyster for my coconut that I'm giving. If I get less than a half of an oyster, I can produce coconuts. I can stop producing coconuts and get that oyster. If I'm only getting a third of an oyster for this coconut, it's no good. So I've got to be more than this one half. Let's kind of double check. Okay. If I put this into a fraction, I'm getting 9 oysters for 13 coconuts. That's more than that's more than one half. Okay. Now, keep in mind what's kind of happened here. All right. After we decide these terms of trade, which we usually don't have to determine, okay, we've kind of given it to you hypothetically here. After we do that, notice I produced oysters here, 25. All right. So I'm going to give up 9 of those oysters. After I give up those 9 oysters, I'm left with 16 oysters. Okay, I got 13. I had 0 coconuts. I had 13. That's my final. That's my final value there. Okay, let's put that on a graph. All right. So remember, Blackbeard, he had the absolute advantage, right? So we're going to put these numbers on a graph. Remember, I specialized. I produced this much. We came to these terms of trade. Okay. Now I gave up 9 oysters. I have 16 left. I got 13 coconuts. I have 13 coconuts left. Kind of made up numbers. You could come up with a few different numbers as well to fit on this graph, but those are the numbers that, again, are going to prove our point. So let's graph this here on our lines. Let's double check our work. 13 coconuts, 16 oysters, and look what's happened here. Okay, we have achieved consuming. We can only produce on this line. But since we traded, we can consume outside. Okay, all right. It works for Blackbeard. He had the advantage anyway. He should be able to take advantage of it. Let's look at Calico Jack here. All right. So Calico Jack, he made coconuts. All right. Terms of trade are what they are. He made 0 oysters. He got 9. Okay. Terms of trade. So he has 9 oysters. All right. and he gave up 13 coconuts. I mean, he made 16 coconuts. He had to give up 13 of them. He had to give up a lot. Remember, he was kind of the crappy producer anyway, right? But either way, okay, he gets 3 coconuts. All right, let's put this on a graph right here. Okay, so let's put this 9 oysters and 3 coconuts on the graph. 9, 3, we can see we get a spot right here for Calico Jack. That is also outside of his line. Okay, so we just proved that gains from trade are going to be advantageous if now can we make an unfair trade? 100% we could. Okay, 100% we could. But if we work at it and we use some economic concepts, we can prove that we can consume outside these lines. Okay, that's what I've got for you today. You'll want to complete the assignment on MyAP. If you've got questions about that stuff, make sure that you're asking me, and we'll get you lined up. The website's a little bit clunky, so to speak, but the benefits of it are going to be very, very high. All right, if you keep doing those. Okay, hope you had a good weekend. We'll talk to you soon.